2 people were killed and 347 homes were destroyed.
One of those homes belonged to our own chief photographer, Mike Petcash. He covered the fire live and the devastation that happened in his own neighborhood. 11 News anchor Katie Pelton talked with Mike 10 years later and shares his story.
Our chief photographer was working the day Mountain Shadows was forced to evacuate. We carried it live as Mike Petcash was evacuating his family. This is actually his video that you're seeing here. He still works here. We went back to his neighborhood to shoot this story. Get this, while I was out there, his neighbors told me that he is the reason they lived because he was shouting at them as the fire came over the ridge.
Go now, Bree, go. Just go, get in the car and go.
What's it like driving down your street now, 10 years later?
Looks totally different. Small trees. That's the one thing I really noticed is driving back up this hills. All the trees are just smaller trees now. They were all fully matured before.
10 years ago, nearly to the day, you were driving back to your home on what would have been the last time that you saw your house. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I drove back. I was actually working, came back to the house, saw flames and tons of smoke coming down the hill. A lot of people in my neighborhood were packing up what little stuff they could get.
Well, my family was gone, my kids were gone, and I believe I'm alive because of Mike Petcash. And I've told him that he came and got our neighbor who was next door and told us the flames were just above us. And so we were able to evacuate right before the houses were destroyed.
I had no idea. I've never heard that story. That is just incredible.
Well, we contribute that. Both the other neighbor who doesn't live here anymore, both and I have said that Mike Petcash saved our lives.
Police came up and made their call for everybody to leave, and it was a little unnerving. I mean, you knew something, it felt like something was going to happen. You could see it coming down the hill. I had what I had and we drove away and that was it.
You're so optimistic. Is that what helped you through this?
I don't know, I think it was like necessity at the time. I don't know if it was being optimistic. It was like, what am I going to do? I got to do something. You can't just sit back and let it knock you down. You got to get back up and do something about it. And that's what we did, and most of my neighbors did the exact same thing.
When we heard everybody was going to rebuild except one, we just said, yeah, this is the neighborhood we want to be in. We love the lot, we love the neighborhood. It's 5 kids on this property, and now we have 6 grandkids, and it's just a great place to come back to, enjoy being together, and it's a home full of love. What more could we ask for?
In the last 10 years, it's night and day from that date. I mean, I still sometimes think about it, but I think all my neighbors are kind of past it now, 10 years later.
Oftentimes we get to talking and we'll say before fire or after fire. And it's just something where it's hard to believe it's been 10 years, but also I'm glad that it's passed quickly. And, you know, with the 10-year anniversary, we're happy to celebrate the growth and the achievements that we've had since the disaster.
I've worked with Mike for so many years, and one notable thing about him, like the rest of his community, is his resiliency. Despite what he went through, he still comes to work every day with a smile and remains hopeful, even 10 years later. Katie Pelton, KKTV 11 News.
Such a humble guy, too. Today, I'm taking you into the Pike National Forest west of Colorado Springs for a look at how things have changed in a decade and why the trail at the center of the fire investigation still is not open.
The images are hard to forget. Towering smoke and flames, a force of nature that burned defiantly for days.
Go now, Bree, go. Just go, get in the car and go.
347 homes leveled in a matter of hours, 2 lives taken. And while we still count the losses from the Waldo Canyon Fire a decade later, a major piece of over 18,000 acres of land once torn apart is slowly, delicately waking up.
10 years after the Waldo Canyon Fire, the scars are still evident. You can see burned trees across the horizon. But there are encouraging signs in the National Forest, too. Little trees planted by crews, thousands of them throughout the area, and green sprouting up across the landscape.
My opinion of this is it looks pretty darn good in that it's grown up.
Carl Bauer was among the crew that helped fight the fire 10 years ago. As the new district ranger for the Pike National Forest, he says now that an estimated 60 to 80,000 trees have been replanted, the forest land destroyed by flames is at a turning point.
It takes almost 10 years for the soils to sort of recover and become more absorbent to water again. So that's the time frame that we're at right now.
The forest is open to the public, just not overnight. The one area that remains completely closed is the Waldo Canyon Trail itself. Investigators believe the fire began within 3 miles of that once popular route. Today, the parking lot along Highway 24 is barricaded off due to safety concerns. Also, the access point is on private property, and Bauer says there are decisions to make.
How we're going to access it, how people are going to be able to use it, and that sort of thing. There's also dead standing snags along the trail, and the trail itself is non-existent in places, so those pose a risk to the public.
Is there a timeline for restoring the Waldo Canyon Trail and figuring out access and all of that?
No, I don't have a timeline on that.
As the forest recovers, Bauer's message to the public is twofold. Be careful with campfires. He says fireworks in the National Forest are illegal and vehicles need to stay on designated roads. But he's also asking for something even more simple. For a community that's made such significant strides recovering from a decade-old disaster, to keep waiting for the time it takes to breathe new life through the ashes.
Nature doesn't turn around on a dime. Have patience, and Mother Nature will definitely reclaim its own, and we'll try to help it as long as we can.
On June 23, 2012, an 18-day battle began. The first flames of the Waldo Canyon Fire were reported around noon. A group of bicyclists on Rampart Range Road west of Colorado Springs may have captured some of the first images of the fire minutes after it broke out. 18,247 acres burned, 347 homes destroyed, 2 lives lost. And a decade later, one big unanswered question. Who started the Waldo Canyon Fire?
It's been 10 years. Why don't you know who yet, do you think?
Well, I think the only way we're going to ever know who is if somebody comes forward.
For years, investigators have said the fire was human-caused.
Investigators are still keeping the details of exactly what caused the fire to themselves. We do know that it sparked within 3 miles of the Waldo Canyon Trail.
The Forest Service says those first flames were off the main trail.
The location of the initial start of this fire was off of a social trail, unofficial user-created trail in the burned area.
And Colorado Springs Police Chief Adrian Vasquez, who served on the multi-agency task force, still won't say more.
What are the top 2 things that you think at this point caused the fire?
So those parts of the investigation we're keeping close. The specific how is important that we keep close because we can easily vet out false information or false accusations or false claims of somebody who started it.
Even 10 years later,
Even 10 years later, absolutely, because we have to remember that if it is intentionally started, we have 2 deaths. And so why did violent crimes take the lead on that? It was because if it were intentionally started, those 2 deaths can be a homicide.
But Vasquez says the possibility remains that the fire was a tragic accident, and he's hoping that someone will come forward.
I believe strongly that the person who set this fire has told somebody else other than that person.
A mystery still unresolved, the answer hidden in a barren forest, slowly being mended by time.
Do you feel like you're closer to narrowing down the who than you were 3 years ago, 5 years ago?
No, there's not been any significant change in the investigation at this point. Really, the investigation itself, beyond additional information coming in, is over. Interviews like this, asking the public, if you know something, please come forward. That's really our greatest hope.
Our series of stories this week focusing on the devastation and recovery from the Waldo Canyon fire are on our website tonight. Look for them at kktv.com.